about. He was like, "Where are you from?" And he was a grown man, and he was drugged up. This kind of environment where windows would get broken, and the landlord would put up a piece of plywood because he was too cheap to replace that window. An environment where we had rats, and the landlord wouldn't get rid of the rats. And then one day, unfortunately, those rats in the middle of the night, my little cousin, he was my neighbor, he was 2 months old. They crawled on his crib and they bit his face up, his lips, his cheeks, his gums. They were attracted to the infant milk, right? These are the conditions that we were living in. And I know for a fact, because I've worked in various communities in LA, I know for a fact some of our children, right, that go to our schools live in these kinds of conditions, right? That hasn't changed a whole lot for children living in poverty, that those kinds of conditions are there. And so we're struggling, we're living in this kind of environment. Meanwhile, in school, I'm a little nerd. Like, I'm a little barrio nerd. I have my little stack of books. I used to read Greek mythology. I loved it all the way through third grade. One day, and my teacher's like, "Hey, Victor, read this word." It was a four-letter word, right? And I was like, "Nope." She's like, "Victor, I need you to read this word right now." And I was like, "Nope." Can anyone in the chat guess why I wouldn't read the word on the board? I couldn't read. I was reading Greek mythology. You, yeah, you did not want to stand out. You don't want others to know you were smart. It was a bad word. You didn't want anyone to make fun of you. I was embarrassed to look cool. It was demeaning. It was a word that you couldn't pronounce correctly. Good in English. The word was actually, I remember the word was echo, but I did want to read it as echo, right? But that's not why, right? Um, I'm gonna tell you why, because sometimes, this is the thing about our teachers, right? They all have good hearts. People don't come into education for the money, right? They come into education for the purpose. So it's not like they show up like, "I'm gonna get this job and collect a check and not help kids," right? They all want to help kids. We know that. We start with that assumption with our educators. Okay, you want to help kids, you want to help children prosper, you want to live a purpose of transforming lives. That's why you're in here. And we remind them of that every time we meet with them, right? And so then through activities, through exercises, through maybe our uncle got pushed out of school and we're mad at the education system because of that, right? Generations of folks in communities of struggle being failed by the system. Now the kids grow up hearing about it, seeing it, and they're like, "Yeah, y'all haven't been good to my people, right?" So it's important for us to make amends, right, and to teach our educators to gain permission from our children. "May I please teach you?" Rather than like, "Hey, sit down and shut up," right? "I'm here to teach you. Sit down and shut up." That's not going to work. That's the old school model, right? The old school model is, a lot of teachers say this to me: "Hey, Dr. Rios, I'm not here to be their friend. I'm here to be their teacher." To which I say, "It's all right. You don't got to be their friend. But can you please be friendly to them?" Right? Those are two different things. You had to be their friend. You go to dinner together. You get on Facebook together, TikTok. You're tapping into their cultural schemas to inspire them to reach a level of success. And one of those cultural schemas in various communities of struggle are that we come from a familial culture. I'll talk about that in a second. So let me share with you my screen, because the the, the remainder the remainder of a I don't have to share my screen. I can show you in the background here real quick. The remainder of my journey continues on into detriment, right? Because after I shut down from school, I drop out of school in eighth grade. I hit the streets. I start hustling. I go to juvie 3 times, 3 felonies, grand theft auto. I don't care. I'm gonna die by my 18th birthday or end up in prison by my 18th birthday. So I don't care. I'm out there hustling. I'm out there grinding. And then one day, I'm on the streets with my homeboy, and he ends up getting shot and killed. And in this moment in my life, I didn't know who to turn to. I didn't know where to go. There was only one person that had told me she would be there for me. That was my teacher, Miss Russ. Hey, Miss Russ, I'm sorry, respect to you, Miss Russ, but that lady was crazy. Estaba loca, you know what I mean? Like she would, you know what she would do? She would be all up in your business. She'd ask people about you, and she'd go into our neighborhood, right? In her little beat up Honda Civic, right? A little back then they looked these Honda Civics were like they looked like little cockroaches, right? They had like they were like round on the top, and she rolled in her beat up Civic, and we would be laughing like this lady's crazy. And she pulled up to our apartment complex, and we called it El Gallinero, which means the chicken coop, because that's where like all of us in the hood, like we lived in this massive apartment complex, and she'd like knock on people's doors, right, and check up on kids. And they didn't understand each other, my mom and my teacher, because of language, but my teacher still was there, telling her how much she was worried about me. And my mom kind of got the message. It's like I better, get to school. And there were times when my mom was at school and I wasn't even there, and it kind of embarrassed me a little bit, right? So anyway, my teacher uh, told me one day, many times actually, she would be there for me when I was ready to change. So I go back to school to look for my teacher. I hadn't been there in months. And y'all saw that video where I'm kind of, there. This is the hallway of my school, and I'm in this gang fight, and the cop tracks me away. So like I'm walking down the same hallway looking for my teacher. She comes out of one of these doors and she says, "Victor, I heard what happened. Are you okay?" And I'm trying to be a tough guy. I'm like, "Yeah, I'm all right." This lady knew I wasn't okay, so she taps me on my shoulder. Right when she tapped me on my shoulder, all my pain, all my fear, all my anger grew. I cried like a little kid right here in these hallways with all these kids passing. You know what this teacher did? She opened up her arms. She gave me a hug. She said, "Victor, I'm here for you. You're ready to change your life around. I'll be here for you, but you have to do the work." Ms. Russ had two things going for herself as an educator. She had what I call a prosperity framework. And the prosperity framework is that you provide both high level of social emotional support. I'm here for you. But you also have high rigor, high expectations for children. And that's when she said, "But you have to do the work, and I'm gonna hold you accountable to that work." Right? It wasn't like she was giving me a free pass. A lot of times, see, in the old school model of education, we separate as two different kinds of educators. Oh, I'm the kind that gives them social emotional support, and then the other colleagues like, "Oh, you're the kind that gives them a free pass." I'm the kind that's high rigor, high expectations, so I'm giving no one a free pass. And it's like, no, we got to bridge those two worlds together, right? We can't be pitying kids, right? Pity isn't prosperity, right? That we can't just pity kids or the communities they come. There's a lot of strength in those communities, right? So how do we bring out those assets and strengths so that our educators can see them, and not just see them, because a lot of our teachers see them, but apply them in day-to-day teaching practice. That's the key right there. So with the help of my teacher, I ended up going back to school, catching up on my credits. I ended up, graduating high school on time and with my class. And yeah, I mean, I was, I felt blessed that this teacher, helped me out. Then she connected me with some mentors, and these mentors uh, were college students, and they were coming from my community. They looked like me, and they came from a similar community to me. And they say, "Hey, Victor, you know what? Um, people like us can go to college too." So the transformative educator humanizes her students and their families on a day-to-day basis. This is what Miss Russ would do. Right? She would always say to her colleagues, "I don't teach subjects, I teach students." Right? I think that's an important distinction to make, right? That we get trained even for elementary children, right? In multiple subject credentials, we're teaching multiple subjects. No, we're not teaching multiple subjects, right? We're teaching students. And what's cool about the work you do is that elementary schools are a model for the rest of, middle and high schools, because elementary schools are very community receptive. Elementary schools are very community embracing, But by the time kids get to middle school and high school, that starts to drop, right? Parent participation. Y'all know this story. So how do you support your children past elementary school? The way you do it is you plant the seeds now that they're going to need in middle school and high school, and that is that, as you know, and as you apply in your practice, it's never too early to teach about college, career, and success in the future, but it has to be culturally responsive. And I think that's the key right there, the cultural responsiveness. And I'll get to that in a minute with a very specific concept. So I talked about learning loss, right? Let's call it learning cultivation and emotional gain. And of course, there's a lot of inequalities out there that we're fighting to change. But meanwhile, while we fight those inequalities that are structural on a day-to-day level, how you address inequality is through that emotional support. So I want to talk a little about this, a little bit about this ecosystem of cariño and what I mean by that.
Dr.
I know
Rios,
some of you,
I
yeah.
just want to make sure for your screen share, I think you just need to click off the settings box so we can see what you're projecting. Just close
Oh,
that
so you're not.
box. Well, it's covering what you're
Oh,
projecting.
you can
Just
see my
close.
settings.
Yes, just close
Okay.
that box. Click the red arrow at the top left. Oh, perfect.
You're
We're
able?
good.
Okay.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you so much for telling me. So the ecosystems of cariño. I know you know that many of you here know that cariño means care, but it also means a lot more. In Spanish, cariño means embrace. It means a genuine connection. It means
Rios,
affection,
tengo mi
right?
cámara
And that's
abajo.
what our children and their families need to feel. That there's an, a surrounding environment where they show up and they feel like people here care about me and my family. Many times, especially with children that are getting in trouble in our schools, because this was in high school. And then parent engagement, right? That's very important. Also, bringing these two worlds of Maslow and Bloom together, right? We know Maslow, right? So that's where the social emotional learning kind of foundations are formed there. And then Bloom is about the academic, intellectual learning, right? No longer separating these two worlds, considering them mutually exclusive, but instead bridging them together. This is what I call Mas Bloom, right? So the social emotional support, what I call educator projected self actualization. I'll show a little bit of that in a minute. And then high rigor, high expectations. This is the prosperity practice framework that I talk about and that I mentioned early on. So for a long time, we see kids like this. I'm at the bottom there throwing up a sign. And then there's kids I followed for one of my books. One of them's 14 holding a gin bottle in his hand. We see them as risks, right? So we have to go from this threat perspective to an asset perspective, right? Instead of at risk, for 20 years, I've been saying, hey, let's call our kids that promise, right? That they have that potential no matter what adversities they're facing. And it changes the way we come up with solutions, right? As a school house, right? As an individual school. So I worked with an elementary school in Sacramento. They were having a tough time. They were spending hundreds of kids, hundreds of suspensions they would have every year. And it was mostly Black children, followed by brown children. And they were like, we need help. Long story short, we did a program there with the staff in the school. And I said, look, you come up with a framework that's asset based. And they did. When I came back, they said, Dr. Rios, we got the framework. It's the sharks versus the goldfish. I'm like, what does that mean? They're like, look, a lot of times we're talking in deficit and don't even realize it. Like we're in the staff lounge and we're like, oh, that's fifth grader. Oh my goodness. He's so tough. And his mom is strung out. His dad's in prison. The family's dysfunctional. And sometimes we get thrown aback, but we don't know how to react to that. So now we've all agreed as a faculty and staff that whenever we see each other talking in a deficit way about our children as if they were sharks or their families or their communities, all we have to do is say, hey, goldfish, remember? All our children are goldfish. Their families are goldfish. The community is gold. And you think about the word goldfish, right? The word gold is in there. Who doesn't like gold, right? There's a beautiful kind of framing of who these children are and who their families are and who their communities are. So it's very important to bring in very practical applications that are organic to the school, right? As Mr. Baez was saying, like you got to figure out what's going on in that local context before you provide solutions. And he's actually speaking to a literature and organizational theory that finds that schools, like law enforcement, by the way, are loosely coupled institutions, and therefore you can't just impose top down policy because then by the time the teacher goes in and closes the door, hey, they're doing what they need to do to survive in that classroom, right? So you have to change the culture, and it's got to come from them, not from us. Oh, this is the new rule, right? No more at risk, no more you talk to your kids like this. Well, actually, it's got to come from them. It's got to be a process, and this is why the school came up with this framework, and they use it, and it's a good way of just shifting the way we approach and talk about our children and their communities. The familial culture piece, that's an important one, I think, because we take it for granted uh, that our children come from familial cultures, so many of them, but we don't really welcome the day-to-day practices of familial cultures in our teachings to them about succeeding. Okay, so I'll give you a couple examples. This is an example of from familial culture, like commencement, graduation, promotion time. You give the kids, even in elementary school, right? They're getting ready to go on to middle school, junior high school, and you give the kids, four tickets for four family members because you don't got room. You're a little elementary school, and then 20 family members show up, right, to celebrate. You're like, oh my goodness, fire marshal's going to show up. Well, here's the thing. The reason that there's this showing of community, right, during all these commit, and the older they get, the more people tend to show up, right, is because of this notion that when I make it, my whole community makes it. When you make it, there's an expectation of the community to celebrate you, right? And so embracing these familial cultures means that instead of teaching children, hey, you go to college, to get away from your community, you go to college, on your own, far away, right? What we're teaching them instead is, hey, you go to college so you can come back and help your community. And that's what my teacher would do. Miss Russ, she would always say to me, look, I need you to go to college because I know how much your community is suffering and they need people to show up and come up with solutions. I need you to go to college because I've seen how your mom lives and I know you want to help her out. You want to help her out? I'm like, yeah, I want to help my mom out. All right, then go to college. And this is how she encouraged me to go off to college. I went to Cal State. After Cal State, I ended up at Berkeley for a PhD. In the year 2005, I became Dr. Victor Rios. And yes, you better believe I had like 30 people at my graduation, even though I only had four tickets, right? So celebrating, right, these familial cultures and applying, right, the familial culture schema framing into the day-to-day practices of educating children, the messaging we send them. So because of someone like you, an educator, I found a key. And that key was, of course, the key to success, but it was also the key to help my mom buy a house. I graduated Berkeley on a Sunday with my PhD on a Monday. I was at the bank asking for a home loan, went bought a house a couple months later. I had a key, drove to my mom's dilapidated apartment, handed her the key, and thanked her for all the struggles she had, been through to raise us. Even though she wasn't the perfect mom. If y'all watch my film, The Push House, which is airing on PBS right now, you will learn a little bit more about my story. With my mom, it wasn't the perfect relationship. She was not emotionally there for me, but she taught me how to be tough. She taught me how to survive in the streets because she was from the streets. So anyway, all to say that I was able to help my mom out in the work that your educators do. right? The work that they put in on a day-to-day basis. All this burnout, all these struggles is not for no reason. It's for a reason, and that's to change lives and to help prop up the future outcomes of our students and their families. I'll leave you with a few concepts. Educator projected self-actualization. So, like a PowerPoint projector, right? You project a future they haven't even begun to imagine. So you see here, Miss Russ would say to me, Victor, I'm proud of you. One day you'll meet presidents. I'd laugh at her. I'm like, Miss Russ, estás loca. 20 years later, after writing my book, Punished, Policing the Lives of Black and Latino Boys, I get invited to the White House to advise the Obama administration on gun violence and policing in America. So on my whole flight there, guess who I'm thinking about? Miss Rez, there's my boy. We're at the White House lawn celebrating. Just do the strong SEL. We can't just expect a lot and not give a lot, right? The high rigor, high expectations, plus the strong SEL is crucial here for our students.
He's captivating.
This is how we'll get them, give them the support to prosper. So here's my framework. I'm not going to go into it, but I've covered a lot of it already. I talked about mass bloom in the academics. I talked about educator projected self-actualization in the social emotional learning. And I talked about in the behavioral side, some of you might recognize this if you're into PBIS, emotion informed approaches. It's just expanding, building on PBIS, right? Now, I know y'all are going to be talking about trauma-informed approaches. I just have a few comments on that. I think it is a very important framework. I think we have to build on it some more because we're more than just traumatized, right? What we call it is emotion-informed approaches. It really takes into perspective the full spectrum of human emotion. And just, this is our book that talks about a lot of these practices. The first principle in emotion-informed approaches is understanding and showing respect for your students' community, culture, background, and family. How do the communities that your students come from show love, care, and compassion? That's building the strength-based perspective in the teaching, in the interaction, in the parent engagement. It's an entire community model. All right, I'm going to end with teacher self-efficacy because when you have high teacher self-efficacy, you end up with high success among your student population, right? This is for all teachers across the career span. Teacher self-efficacy is the judgment a teacher makes about their ability to bring about desired student outcomes in the realm of student engagement and student learning. In other words, if I believe that I could be successful with my students, I will be successful with my students. And you'll be surprised, a lot of teachers don't, we survey a lot of them, they don't actually believe they could be effective with all their students, right? When you're aware as an administrator of the source of self-efficacy, you have an opportunity to develop it. So what is the source of self-efficacy? We conducted a study, and I'll tell you in a second. Why is self-efficacy important? Well, it impacts effectiveness, confidence, teacher retention, student learning experience, and this is an important one during our tough times right now, increased enjoyment in teaching. So when can you develop this self-efficacy? I'll tell you, during the teacher evaluation process. And I don't know how you do teacher eval, but it has to be a more, if you're doing a customized eval, that is incredible. If it's a little bit more summative, it's got to become a little bit more formative. And I'll break that down in a second. Teachers who received constructive feedback felt better about themselves as teachers as a result of the evaluation process. They demonstrated higher belief in their students' capacity to achieve. Teachers as leaders conversations, when we watch what they're doing and talk to them in a constructive way about how they're leading the class, right? Not just the content, but their leadership style. It helped them to remember their purpose. So going back to the summative versus formative, one is, right, kind of the standardized document that we use. I know a lot of admin use apps on their phone to kind of check off what's going on in the classroom. I think those are okay, but the whole point of this is that what teachers report helps them is when they get a customized, qualitative, constructive feedback model from you as their administrator. Right? This is what I saw. This is what you could improve on. This is what changes you could make. This is what was great. Teachers also don't like to hear, "Oh, that was great, wonderful," and then we walk away. They actually want to hear some, feedback that'll help them level up, right? So, and then addressing them as leaders, right? Teaching them that they are leaders of their pack, and that's the pack of students that they have in their classroom, and also teaching them about their own leadership styles. And then identifying, have you identified with your teacher what your leadership style is? Oh, this is my leadership style. I've reflected on it. What's your leadership style? And sometimes leadership styles, as you know, in the research, some leadership styles aren't compatible with others. And that's where we have to learn to shapeshift and teachers to shapeshift so that we can adjust to each other's leadership styles. We do a whole workshop on leadership styles. In conclusion, principals, educators, um, my teacher believed in me so much, he tricked me into believing in myself. Thank you so much for your time today. I hope you have a wonderful, blessed weekend, and I hope to see you all at some point soon. Take care. Bye bye.